and thank you for joining us today. My name is Yongki Hong, and I'm a senior associate at Scott Legal PC. Today's webinar will focus on E-2 visa investor requirements and renewal considerations. I'll be covering the first half of the presentation, and then our firm's another senior associate, Dustin Saldarriaga, will take over for more specific examples and considerations. Before we dive in, let me briefly introduce our firm and go over a few housekeeping items. We are a full-service immigration law firm, and we offer services in a wide range of areas, including E2, O1, TN, L1, H1B, and any types of employment or family-based green card cases, and more. Especially, we have built a strong reputation for E-2 visa cases. We have processed thousands of E-2 visas, and many of them are higher risk cases. And we have worked with the U.S. consular offices all over the world. One reason for this particular focus on E-2 visa is that our firm was established on E-2 visa by our firm's founder, Ian Scott himself. And that's why we know a lot about the E-2 visa world. At the end of this webinar, we'll send you several useful tools. A copy of a PowerPoint presentation we'll go through today, a link where you can download guidelines with more details on visa options, a link to sign up for additional webinars, a link to webinar recording on YouTube. We encourage you to subscribe and hit the notification button as we regularly post immigration related videos. And a link where you can sign up a consultation with us. Finally, for any questions, please type them into chat box or Q&A box. We'll discuss all questions at the end of presentation. And with that, let's get started. So what are the requirements for the E-2 visas? E-2 visa is the great visa for the entrepreneurs. You have to be a nation of a treaty country, and currently the United States have signed the treaty agreement with more than 80 countries. The list of E2 countries occasionally change, not that often, but like every few years. A few countries would be added and fall off from the list. So you should check the official E2 country list before you actually submit your E2 visa application. But keep in mind that you do not need to be born from the treaty country. You just need to hold the passport from the treaty country. So for example, let's say you were born in India, which is not a treaty country with the United States, but later you immigrate to the Canada and have a Canada passport right now. Then you are eligible for the E2 visas. And you must own at least 50%, half of the ownership in the E2 entity. And you must be actively participating in the business operation. You cannot be a passive shareholder for the E2 visa application. Okay. The next requirement is you must make a substantial investment. Then what is the substantial investment? Well, we'll talk about this more details later. Dustin will cover it. But generally speaking, it means the sufficient amount to make the E2 business fully operational. The funds must be at risk. This means you actually need to spend money. You cannot claim investment when you wire transfer fund to your E2 corporate bank account and fund just sitting over there. It's not going to U.S. consulate and U.S. governments will not happy about it. The fund must be used before you submit the application. How much investment is enough? We will discuss more details later over this presentation, but generally speaking, the question you should ask is what kinds of business you are starting and what are the reasonable startup costs for the type of business. You also need to prove that the investment funds are coming from the legit source. For example, if your funds are coming from a sale of a property, then you will need to submit a signed contract, closing documentation, and bank statement showing the deposit of net proceeds from the transaction. For this matter, please keep in mind that government wants to see a very clear fund flows from the documentation. So you should try very hard to keep it everything simple and easy for the government officers to understand how funds were originated and came to the E-2 business account. Business also must be real and operating. What it means is that when you arrive at United States with your valid E-2 visa, your business must be able to immediately start operating. So it's not like you are going to get E-2 visa first and then come to United States to start establishing your business. No, it goes completely the other way around. Your E-2 business should have been already established in order to apply and get approval for your E-2 visa. To prove this element is satisfied, you will usually need to submit a signed commercial lease agreement, business entity registration document, perhaps a company website showing the company is already up and running, contracts with the customers, whatever necessary licenses from local governments. There is also marginality requirement. Uh, the whole point of E2 business is creating jobs and contributing to the local economy in the United States. So if the E2 business is barely making income just to cover you as an E2 investor and your family members' living costs, the government will not like it. So therefore, it is very important that your E2 business should create enough incomes to hire US employees. You can hire employees before you even apply for the E2 business, and actually such would strengthen your E2 case. E2 visa also requires you have intent to return to your home country upon expiration of your E2 visa. Please keep in mind that E2 visa is not a green card or does not automatically lead to a green card. It only allows you to enter the United States for a temporary period to develop and run your E2 business. It does not mean you cannot renew your E2 visa or obtain US permanent residency. You could renew it, eventually go after US green card, but you should carefully design the case direction with an immigration attorney for the green card case. So move on, next page. There are two ways to approach your E2 visa case. One is to start your own business, and second is purchasing an existing business. The first option is basically you need to do everything from the scratch. You will have to register the corporation in the State Department and sign the lease agreement. You need to do many things to have the business up and running. The second option is to buy an existing business, and buying an existing business also has two sub ways. One is you can go through a sale uh, before your E2 visa is approved, which will be riskier option because you already owned, you already have ownership of the business, but you are not really authorized to run it yet. So somebody else in the United States need to run the business for you while you are going through the visa E2 visa applications. Another option is the buying existing business through escrow agreement. This means all the terms and conditions are satisfied for the business transaction except the visa approval itself. So the escrow agent will hold the money, and once the agent confirms that your E2 visa is approved, then he will release the money to the seller. That's how the second option goes through the escrow agreement. However, E2 visa application is denied, then money will go back to buyer. So it gives you more protection, and therefore it is like a more attractive option. So how long is E2 visa valid? It depends on the treaty agreement between the United States and the foreign country. It could be very short, like 3 months, or 5 years. Uh, does does it mean that I could run my business only for 3 months if visa is only valid 3 months? Answer is no. Regardless of the visa validity duration on your passport, you will typically get 2 years of E2 visa status when you come to the United States. So you could run your E2 business for 2 years, but once you go out from the United States again, you have to reapply and renew your E2 visa in your home country. Please make sure to understand that the difference between visa and status though. A visa is more like an admission ticket to the United States. But once you are inside the United States, your authorized duration of stay is not governed by visa anymore. The CBP officer at the airport will issue I-94 form, and this form will decide your actual duration inside the United States. So when we say you, regardless of your visa duration, you will allowed to stay in the United States for 2 years, that authorization is coming from CBP at the airport. And for the E2 visa, so even if you have 5 years of E2 visas, you may need to make another international travels, and it's a couple of times, because the CBP will give you only 2 years. So you have to continuously renew your I-94 duration. So that's why it is very important to check your I-90 forms. It's electronic forms nowadays. So whenever you re-enter the United States. So next page. So let's talk about how much investment is enough. This is a very common question that please keep in mind that there is no minimum set of investment amount. EB5 world, there is actual minimum investment amount set by the regulation, but that's not the case for the E2 visa. But you have to invest a substantial amount of money. And that depends on type of business you are starting, on where you are applying, because each consular post applies slightly different review standard, and overall strength of your case will be kind of depends on their local review standard. So government also use a proportionality test. What it means is that if the startup cost for the consulting service, for example, is based is, let's say, it's $50,000, then the government wants to see that you have spent very high percent of total investment fund. But if your business is, for example, let's say pharmaceutical factory that needs millions and millions of dollars, then you could just invest a lower percentage of a total investment fund before you actually submit the application. So let's say the factory needs a total $5 million to build everything, and you have invested only $1 million so far. That's only like 20% of the required total startup cost. But government will, U.S. consular or USCIS will agree that such amount is substantial enough to meet the requirement. If you are buying business, you need to consider that whether purchase price you are paying is a fair market value. Please note that the government does not like to see a situation where investor is buying a business for unreasonably low price. To demonstrate that purchase price reflects a fair market value, it is often very good idea to obtain a third-party business evaluation report. For example, valuation report concludes that the business is worth around $100,000 and contract also lists the purchase price as $100,000, then you are in very strong position to make that you are buying the business with the fair market value. You also need to watch out for the seller's financing situation, which is often problematic for the E-2 visa case, although it's practically happening everywhere. It is because you are not allowed to use the E-2 business's asset as a security collateral. For example, you invest only half, 50% of the total purchase price, and you are going to have the other 50% from the seller's financing. Then government usually believes that you have not substantially invested in the business yet because seller's financing is secured by E-2 business's assets. Okay, so franchise are also a good option for the E-2 visas. It could be either you are buying an existing business, or you could even start a new franchise business in a new location. This type of arrangement is good to prove that there is a proven business model and promise the future incomes based on the franchise's existing reputations. You could think about Dunkin' Donuts usually. That's quite famous for the E-2 business nowadays. That's a good example. You also need to think about where you are going to spend the money. There are good and bad expenditures. There are certain expenses that are considered as stronger and some weaker. For example, your travel expenses, hotel accommodation fees, like meals, business meeting with the vendors. Those are not really considered as strong expenditures, but rather considered weak and bad expenditures. But there are another example for the good ones, like purchase of computers, softwares, leasing commercial office space, hiring employees. These are considered as a really good and strong expenditures. Sometimes we get a question whether a home office is acceptable and paying home mortgage is considered as a E-2 expenditure. We do not recommend a home office based on your E-2 visa application, although you could make an argument about it, why your business type does not need a commercial office space. But government does not usually buy this type of explanations, and they have been very conservative about these particular matters. So keep in mind. Next page. Do I have to hire U.S. employees? The answer is yes. The whole point of E-2 visa is, again, to create jobs, contributing to the local economy in the United States. So if E-2 business is barely making income just to cover you and your family members' living costs, then obviously government wouldn't like it. Therefore, it is very important that E-2 business should create enough incomes to hire U.S. employees. So this means your application should prove that you are not going to operate your business as a solo owner and only employee. So you should show that through your business plan that you are going to hire employees in the future. We generally recommend that your business plan shows you are going to hire at least 3 to 5 full-time employees within 5 years. You can even hire employee before you apply for the E-2 application, and again, such actually strengthens your E-2 case. Sometimes people ask whether there is a difference between W-2 employees and 1099 contract workers. Generally speaking, it is better to have a W-2 employees for your E-2 business, but that also depends on type of business. For example, if you are in a construction industry where hiring subcontractors are very common, and in that case, it is okay to pay their fees with a 1099 arrangement. But even if so, your construction business itself should at least have a couple of full-time W employees for the office operation. So the point is, it is not good at all if your E2 business only has a 1099 arrangement. So you should, if you want to have a 1099, it means you should have some mixed with the W2 employees. If your business is new business, you could prove your intention to hire US workers in the future by business plan. And if you are buying a business, you are buying an existing business, then you will need to submit so the existing employees W-2s, the pay stubs, corporation tax returns. So you should carefully choose which business you are going to buy. For example, if the business does not have any employees previously, the solo owner has been operating that particular business for 5 years, last 5 years, and maybe only have a couple of 1099 throughout the 5 years, then that's not a really good candidate for your E2 business transactions, because the past results is not really supporting that your E2 case, your E2 visa and your E2 business itself significantly improve in the future. Okay, so you should look for another candidate for your E2 business transactions, have a little more W2 employees. Okay, so with that in mind, let me turn it over to Dustin, who will guide you through the next part of our presentation. He will cover how to build up and improve your E2 case. So please stay tuned.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Yongki. So I am going to build off of the information that Yongki already shared with you all. So as Yongki mentioned, it is important to show that the E2 company will employ U.S. workers. It's not necessary to actually have those workers employed before you apply. Okay, so it is okay to apply, for example, with a startup where you have a really strong business concept, and you say, once I get the visa, I will start hiring. That is okay. But if you're going to do that, it's really critical to have a business plan. And that's what we're talking about on this slide. The business plan really needs to convince the government officer that even though you only have an idea, you don't actually have an operating business yet, your business is very likely to employ U.S. workers. Typically, we recommend that our clients show that they will employ at least 3 full-time equivalent U.S. workers within 5 years of starting operations. And that's fundamentally what the business plan needs to show. The business plan needs to show how the company is going to get to at least 3 full-time equivalent U.S. workers in 5 years of operations. So how do you do that? Really, the business plan needs to show an executive summary that really lays out in a very concise way, typically 1 page, what the business is going to sell, who it's going to sell to, and really how it's going to get on a path to lead to employment. It's going to include several other sections that are really critical, including market analysis and research, what the target clientele looks like, where the business is going to be based, also who the competitors are, a marketing plan, how the business is going to get the word out that it is selling, whether that's a website, whether that's social media, SEO. It could be pamphlets, it could be cold calling, whatever, or it could be a combination of all these things. It also could be the E2 owner's reputation. Maybe the E2 owner has quite a reputation in the field and is going to use that expertise and reputation to build a clientele. But the marketing plan is really going to focus on how the business is going to get the word out and actually generate demand for its services. The personnel plan is, as I mentioned, really key. This is going to show over a 5-year period who is going to be hired. So what we usually do in our business plans that we prepare for clients is we provide a table. In year 1, the company is going to hire this position. In year 2, it's going to have these additional 2 positions. In year 3, it's going to add 1 more position. And you actually are showing the title, you're showing the salary that's paid for each position, and how that salary is going to increase over time based on inflation. So that table can be a very good way for the officers to see, even at a glance, what positions are going to be filled in what years and what they're going to be paid. In addition, the personnel plan should have details about, for each of those job titles, what the job duties are going to be. And if the position is already filled, which is wonderful, then the business plan will state that this position is currently being filled by this person. Next is a comprehensive financial plan. So this is as important as the personnel plan, because what the financial plan is going to show is, first of all, the assumptions that underlie the projections. So what that means is, how many clients do you need in year 1, 2, 3, 4, 5? What products do you need to sell to generate the revenue that you're projecting? What will be the costs that you're projecting? And then what will be the profits that you're projecting? And really, all of this, again, is being supported by the assumptions you have. So in order to hit our projected revenues and profits, we need to sell 100 of this product in year 1, 200 of the product in year 2, and so on. So really, the financial projection is where the officer is going to look to understand why the company is actually going to need the U.S. workers that are projected in the personnel plan. So the business plan really fits together as a solid, a piece that fits together, works together. So it's really important that the information all support each other. So the marketing plan is going to generate the demand that's going to show how the assumptions are reasonable, which is going to feed into the projections, which is going to feed into the personnel plan, and how you're going to need people actually working at the company if customers are going to be served. So let's talk about a few considerations regarding the E-2 visa. Yongki already touched on a number of these. I'll go into a bit more detail. Also, just a reminder, if you do have questions, feel free to send those in using either the question and answer function or the chat. We'll get to those questions at the end, but just a reminder. So for considerations, one of the first questions that people will consider is, should I apply through USCIS or a consulate? Another way to frame the question is, should I apply from within the US, which is USCIS, or should I apply outside the U.S. through a consulate? If you are outside the United States, then your only option is to apply at a consulate. You must apply at a consulate. If you're inside the U.S., you have both options. So you can apply at a consulate if you want to, and then you'll just leave the U.S., go to the consulate for the interview, come back in with your visa. Or if you're inside the U.S., you can apply through USCIS, and what that is called is a change of status, because you'll be in the United States with the status you currently have, whether that is, say, a B1 business visitor visa or maybe an F1 student visa, and then you're changing status to E-2 status. So that's USCIS. The consulate is when you actually leave, you go to a consulate, you get your visa, and you come back in E-2 status using that visa. One thing that is very important to understand about these two options is that only a consulate can issue a visa. USCIS can issue status. So as a result, if you apply through USCIS, the moment you leave, okay, let's say that you are an F1 student, you apply to change your status to E-2 status, and that's approved, so you're in E-2 status now. If you leave, you abandon that status, and you need to get a visa at a consulate to come back in that status. So for that reason, we will usually recommend that clients apply through a consulate. That will get them a visa, which means they can leave the U.S. and they can come back into the U.S. really as many times as they want to while their visa is valid, which, for, as Yongki mentioned, for most countries is 5 years, can be as short as 3 months, but those are the exceptions. So as long as your visa is valid, you can enter and leave the U.S., have E-2 status each time you enter. And as Yongki mentioned, each time you enter, you're typically given 2 years of E-2 status. Even if your visa is valid for 3 months, if you enter while your visa is valid, you typically get 2 years of E-2 status, meaning you can stay for 2 years and build your E-2 business. So for that reason, a visa is usually a much more convenient option for our clients, and it is usually our recommendation. So when would you want to apply through USCIS? The reason you'd want to apply through USCIS is, for example, if it's difficult for you to travel. We saw this a lot during the COVID pandemic where borders were shut down. So if you were in the U.S., you did not want to leave. You wanted to stay here and build your business without leaving. So a change of status made sense where it's difficult to travel and you're willing to commit to staying inside the U.S. and make it worthwhile. Another reason is if your visa has a short expiration date. So let's say you are from a country with a 3-month visa validity period. You'll enter the U.S., get 2 years of status, and you may just say, you know what, I'm not going to deal with applying for a visa again. I'm just going to stay in the U.S. and extend my E-2 status. So you would do that through USCIS. The other reason you would want to apply through USCIS, and this actually we do see quite often, is if you want a very quick decision. So right now at consulates, on average, they're taking about 3 months between the date you submit your application to the consulate to the date you actually get your visa in your passport. So on average, about 3 months, although that could be significantly longer. Some consulates are taking 6 months, 9 months, but that 3 to 4 months is a good average to have in mind. But let's say that you're here on a student visa. You have, as a student, you've put in place everything you need for the E-2 visa. You could even have started operations, business operations, depending on your OPT, your optional practical training. You could have already started your business, and let's say you want to immediately switch to E-2 status so that there's as short an interruption as possible. You don't want to leave, wait 3 months to get your E-2 visa. You actually want to start operations as soon, or continue operations as soon as possible. So what you can do there is you can apply through USCIS, which offers a what's called premium processing, which guarantees a decision within 15 business days. So that is a wonderful option. That is going to be the fastest way for you to get a decision on your E-2 application. To my knowledge, there is no consulate that will get you a decision in 2 weeks. Again, the fastest is probably going to be at least a month or two. USCIS guarantees a decision in 15 business days. So if you're in the US and you say, you know what, I don't want an interruption, or I want to start this business as soon as possible. If you're on a B1 visitor visa, you can apply for a change of status, pay for premium processing. It does cost about $3,000. It's not cheap, but if you need a fast decision, that is going to be your option. What you can do is file actually simultaneous applications with USCIS and the consulate. What that would do, you can do a USCIS premium processing application and file at the consulate at the same time so that USCIS will give you a decision in 15 business days. And then the consulate, 4 months later, when they're ready, they will call you in for an interview. So you can stay in the U.S., assuming that your change of status application is approved. Stay in the U.S., and then once you need to go to the interview, you'll just leave for the interview, go to the consulate, get your visa, and come back in. So that's the option if you want to reduce the interruption, or if you're in the U.S. and you really want to get E-2 status as soon as possible. All right, so let's keep going down these bullet points. Next, source and trail of funds. So why is this a consideration? Yongki mentioned that it's a good idea to very carefully document exactly where you're getting the funds to invest in your business, and not only where you're getting the funds, but the entire trail of those funds. So if you sold an apartment in London and that is your source of funds, you need proof that you own the apartment. You need proof that you sold the apartment. You need proof that the funds from that sale were transferred into your personal account. And then if you move them from your personal account, your checking account, to an investment account, you need proof of that movement. And then if you sold stocks and moved the funds back into your personal account, you need proof of that movement. And then proof that the funds went to the E-2 company. So you see how this can be very document intensive. Fortunately, a lot of consulates have a page limit, so we wouldn't actually be able to include all of those documents, but there's always a chance that the consulate could come back and ask for those documents. So you do want to have careful, detailed documentation of the source of funds and the movement of those funds from the source all the way to the E-2 company. If you are applying through USCIS, USCIS does not have a page limit. So they expect to see documentation of every single dollar invested in the E-2 company and the path that dollar took. So be sure to have detailed documentation for USCIS. This plays into what we were talking about before, whether it's good to apply at USCIS or a consulate, because if you don't have very good documentation, let's say you know that the funds are from the sale of your apartment, but you didn't keep very good documentation of that, then we are probably going to recommend that you not apply through USCIS. Instead, apply at a consulate where there's a page limit, so that you're not going to be able to provide complete documentation, even if you had it because of the page limit. If the consulate comes back and wants it, you may need to do some explaining. You may need to get affidavits, things like that, if you don't have documentation. But they usually don't. They usually don't come back and ask for that. So if you do have great documentation, then USCIS is not going to be an issue. And USCIS, one thing I should mention as well, USCIS tends to accept lower investment amounts. So if, let's say, you only have $50,000 to invest in your business, which we would consider a low investment amount, then USCIS may be a very good option, because a lot of consulates will want to see a slightly higher investment amount. The next item on your screen is loans secured by company assets. So it is okay to have a personal loan as your source of funds. So let's say that you go to your bank and you say, hey, I'm going to get a loan based on my home, and I'm going to invest those funds into the E-2 company. That's okay, because that's a personal loan, and if you default on the loan, you lose your house, which would not be good. We'd hope that doesn't happen. That would be okay, though, because the loan is secured by your personal assets. What would not be okay is to get a loan secured by the E-2 company. So let's say that you have built a company in the US from abroad, you've done it remotely, and you get a loan based on your business that you then use to qualify for the E-2 investment. That's going to be a problem. You cannot use funds that are secured, funds from a loan that's secured by your E-2 company. That's very important. Fortunately, though, that's one of the few exceptions. Almost any source of funds that's lawful and legitimate and is genuinely your personal funds, including a personal loan, is going to be acceptable. So that is the positive aspect of this. What about gifts? You can use gifts. The thing to know about gifts is that you do still need to document where the person who gave you the gift got the money from. So let's say you have a very generous uncle who says, you know what, I really believe in you. I'm going to give you $100,000 to start your business. And let's say that uncle got those funds from cryptocurrency transactions that he has absolutely no documentation about. That's going to be a problem, because you do need to document where your generous uncle got his money from. But if your uncle was really good about using a cryptocurrency exchange that documents everything well, and he has all the documentation, that is probably going to be fine. So gifts are generally a good and acceptable source of funds, as long as you can document them and it was a lawful source. What about this next point? Considerations for small investment amounts. We actually have a separate webinar on exactly this topic. So if you are applying with a low investment amount, what I mean by that is under $100,000, then watch our separate webinar. I'm sure we'll be giving it again in sometime soon. It's one of our most popular webinars. So either join live or watch on YouTube our past recording for this webinar of low or risky E2 applications, low investment amounts, for low investment amounts. Because our firm, we actually pride ourselves on helping clients who don't have a ton of funds to invest in their business. Our founder, Ian Scott, as Yongki mentioned, got an E2 visa. Our investment amount was actually quite low to start this firm. I think it was even below $50,000. We would not recommend that for our clients, but the takeaway is that if you have a low investment amount, there are ways to structure the application in other ways other than the investment amount that reassures the officer that in spite of a low investment amount, this business is likely to succeed. One of the best ways you can do that is by hiring U.S. workers. So let's say you have a low investment amount, but you have already hired a U.S. worker, you're already generating revenue. That is not necessarily going to be a risky application because you're showing that in spite of a low investment amount, that investment has been sufficient to get the business running and successful. So therefore, by definition, the investment amount has been substantial, which is actually the requirement by law, a substantial investment. So if you do have a low investment amount, what are ways that you can bolster the application? I mentioned hiring workers. If you cannot hire workers, then you can get letters of intent from prospective clients, people who say, once this business starts, I am interested in doing business with them. I need these services. And we would include those letters from prospective clients in the application. You can also get a letter from a certified public accountant who says, based on my experience, this person has invested a substantial amount into the business. This is a sufficient amount to get the business going. You can also get a letter from your local chamber of commerce, which can say that this business is going to be providing services or products that are in demand in our area, and this business is likely to create jobs for our community. So things like that can really help an application with a low investment amount. The next item, E2 visas for 2 investors. So the requirement is that you must own at least 50% of the E2 company in order to qualify as an E2 investor. So that means you can have 2 E2 investors for a single business if they each own 50% of the business exactly. That is fine, but they must own at least 50% each. So where this runs into issues is if this is a company where they want to sell equity. So it's fine to sell equity, but not if you have 2 E2 investors, because the moment you sell 1% of the company, one of those 2 investors, if not both of them, becomes ineligible for the E2 visa. One of the neat things about having 2 E2 investors is that there is a related visa called the E2 employee visa. What that is a visa for people from the country of the E2 company's nationality. So if you have, let's look at a hypothetical. Let's say you have a national of Canada who owns 100% of the company. And that national of Canada is starting a sushi restaurant in the United States. That national of Canada can, if they know an exceptional sushi chef in Canada, they can apply for that sushi chef to get an E2 employee visa to come to the U.S. and work for the sushi restaurant as a sushi chef. But the sushi chef must be a national of Canada because the E2 company is a national of Canada because the owner is a national of Canada. When you have 2 E2 investors, the company can have dual nationality. So let's say that Canadian national owns 50% of the sushi restaurant, and a national of Japan owns the other 50% of the restaurant. At that point, the E2 company in the U.S. has dual nationality, Canadian and Japanese, and can hire sushi chefs from either Canada or Japan through the E2 employee visa. They could also hire managers or executives from Canada or Japan. So there are options in terms of the E-2 employee visa, and when you have dual nationality for the business, you have two countries that you can hire E-2 employees from. So substantive changes to the business after filing. This is a complex area. If this is relevant to you, I do recommend you schedule a consultation. But basically, when you file an E-2 application, you define in that application what the scope of the business is, what the products and services that the business will provide are. So if you're opening, let's say you're opening that sushi restaurant, and in your application, you define it as, I am going to run a sushi restaurant. And you get to the US, and let's say the business is going well, but you want to start a side hustle, consulting and helping other people make successful restaurants. And you're going to start advertising yourself as a consultant. That is risky to do because your application said you're just going to be running a restaurant. The easy way to address this is if you think you're going to be doing something else, change the scope of your application. Say, we're going to run a sushi restaurant, but we're also in the future going to start consulting and helping other business owners manage their restaurants. If you do that, if you represent the scope of your business as broader, it's fine to stay within that scope. So if you know you want to do it, then just expand your business plan, the scope of your business plan, and put that as a possible scope in the future. If you didn't do that, and let's say you just discovered this love of consulting, you have your visa, then it gets a little more complicated. You should talk with a lawyer, see if it's within the scope, see if it's related, if the argument can be made. If you're starting a coffee shop and you're running a business, that's probably related. It's probably fine, as long as it's within the same LLC or corporation. But if you are starting an activity that's unrelated, like I said, say consulting, then there are options. You can apply to USCIS for basically an opinion about whether it's a substantive change. We've done that on a number of occasions with great success, where USCIS says, you know what, I think that this is actually related, so you don't need to apply again. But that's not a guarantee of what will happen moving forward. There are times when USCIS will say, this is unrelated, so either stop doing it, or you need to get a new E-2 visa, or you need to apply through USCIS to extend your status with this new scope. You might also contact the consulate to get their opinion about whether it's within scope. So you do have options there. But it's worth talking with a lawyer about that, because this is a gray area. What is related to the business? What becomes a substantive change? It is a gray area. And then finally, we have higher risk cases. There are certain businesses that just by their nature are high risk. So any business that deals with investment, real estate, these tend to be closely scrutinized because the government tends to be skeptical that they will create jobs for U.S. workers. So you want, in these applications, you want to be very clear how you're going to create jobs for U.S. workers, and that the business is actually going to require U.S. workers. So you have many clients, or you're not, if you're flipping houses, for example, you have a whole portfolio of houses. It's not just one or two. If you're doing investments, equity trading, that you actually are going to be managing numerous people's accounts, where you actually do need administrators and you do need to hire employees to do this. Finally, family business purchases. Just make sure you're paying the fair market value for the business. The government wants to see that you've invested made a substantial investment, which by definition, when you're buying a business, is the fair market value. So if you're getting a great deal from your generous uncle, don't accept it. Say, I need to pay the fair market value if my visa is going to be approved. Common reasons for E-2 denials. We've talked about a number of these. Low investment amount, nature of the business. Certain consulates are more difficult than others. We talked about how USCIS is kinder when it comes to lower investment amounts than consulates, whereas consulates tend to be kinder if you have spotty documentation of where your funds came from. If you have a similar business in your home country and you have not employed workers in your home country, that could legitimately raise questions about whether you're going to employ workers when you come to the U.S. So be ready to address that. Maybe you're going to do something differently in the U.S. Sometimes there are just issues with the officer you get at the consulate or at USCIS, and frankly, there's not much you can do about that. At the consulate, you can apply again. And oftentimes the consulate will try to give your application to a different officer to make sure you get a fair shot. With USCIS, it gets a little more complicated if you're denied, but with USCIS, you do have some more protections than at a consulate. At a consulate, you cannot really appeal. You just apply again. And finally, sometimes people come to us and they've been denied, and we look at the application they submitted and it just does not qualify. So you do want to make sure that you meet the requirements when you file. You have to own 50%, you need the nationality of a treaty country, you need to invest a substantial amount, etc. What about to renew an E-2 visa? So really, the most important thing is employing U.S. workers. The government wants to see you have at least 3 full-time equivalent U.S. workers when you renew. More is great, but typically we recommend 3. And then you're going to include proof of your financial records that the company's doing well. Tax returns are a great idea. Also, payroll records to show you employ workers. If your business isn't doing well, hire workers before you apply to renew. And remember, these don't have to be highly paid employees. You have to pay minimum wage. You should pay the market rate. But it can be someone to just help keep your office clean. It can be someone to help with marketing. Next, you want to make sure that the company still meets the requirement. Always maintain at least 50% ownership as the investor. The moment you drop below 50%, you become ineligible for the E-2 investor visa. And finally, we talked about changes to the business. So just make sure you're always within the scope that you tell the government the business will be operating in. And if you plan to change, talk with a lawyer before you do that. All right, and very quickly, developments and adjudication trends. So the government published statistics do show that E-2 visas have a somewhat high approval rate. We're talking between 80 and 90%. So these applications are approved with regularity. They are a great visa, and fortunately they tend to weather both Democratic and Republican administrations fairly well. Where the changes we do see is in the amount of scrutiny that officers will apply to cases. And what I mean by scrutiny is not necessarily scrutiny based on the regulations. It's oftentimes things like being nitpicky about certain things. So, for example, right now, officers do tend to want to see that at least half of the investment was spent in the U.S. So if your business, say, is selling products on Amazon, don't buy, and you have $100,000 to spend. Don't spend $90,000 on goods from China that you're then going to sell. Try to spend at least half of your investment on the U.S., leasing an office space, professional fees, marketing, have a marketing agency in the U.S. help you out. So just make sure to hit that mark. The government sometimes wants to see higher investment amounts. It's always good to reinforce your investment amount if you can and think creatively about how to increase that amount. Maybe by hiring someone and paying payroll, maybe by increasing your marketing. Those can be great ways to increase your investment amount. Right now, also, officers may want to know that you're going to hire U.S. citizens. This is less of an issue for E-2 investors, more if you're applying for an E-2 employee visa, why the company needs someone from abroad rather than employing someone in the U.S. For E-2 investors, it's really important to just focus on how many jobs you're going to create and that you're creating job opportunities for U.S. workers. Try to get employees rather than contractors. Contractors can count, but they are weaker than employees. So try to get full-time employees. If you can't do that, try to get part-time employees. If you can't do that, use contractors, but they are weaker. Next, we do see more cases going into administrative processing. This is a kind of a process where the consulate just says we need to do additional security review of the application. Unfortunately, there's no way to know why an application is put in administrative processing. There's also no timeline. So sometimes it can take a week or two. Sometimes it can take months. The best thing to do, because this is in a minority of applications, is hope that it doesn't happen. And if it does, you just have to be patient. And you can keep following up with the consulate, respecting that, You should do it maybe once every month or so, not too much, but people do make it out of administrative processing, even though it is annoying. We're also seeing more USCIS filings these days for the reasons we talked about before, oftentimes to get a faster decision on the case. And next, waits at consulates are actually closer to what they were before the pandemic, 3 to 4 months on average, I'd say. Some consulates, though, do still have longer waits. All right, we did get a question. I'm applying for an E-2 from within the U.S. Through USCIS and have a question about holding company structures. I own 100% of a U.S.-based marketing agency and am launching a second subsidiary, a C Corp, for a new software product that helps our clients. Both entities share some resources. Does the E-2 support this holding company approach? So the short answer is yes. The E-2 can, excuse me, support this structure, but you want to be thoughtful and careful about how you structure it. Fundamentally, you need to remember that the E-2 visa allows you only to work for the E-2 entity. And the E-2 entity is defined by a specific C Corp or LLC. That is the entity that should be employing the W-2 workers. That is the entity that should have received your investment, and that is the entity that should be making distributions to you. So you do want to show, you don't want to get into trouble with unauthorized work by showing I'm working for a separate corporation or LLC. But as long as you meet those requirements, let's say you have a holding corporation, and that is the corporation that issues the W-2s, that's the corporation that got your investment, that's the corporation that's making distributions to you, but you have a subsidiary that's doing work, generally that's okay. The other thing we oftentimes will recommend is that there be a management services agreement between the subsidiary and the parent company, which is basically a contract between the two, where the subsidiary is saying we are contracting the parent company to provide services to us, and that allows you as the E2 investor to provide services for the subsidiary. Payment is going to go to the E2 company, though, from the subsidiary, not to you directly. That just it's a belt and suspenders approach to just make it clear that you are only working for the E2 company, and that services are being contracted out by the E2 company, not by you personally, which protects you against unauthorized work. This is a complicated question, though. It can be situation dependent, so schedule a consultation if you have any follow-up questions about that. I think that was the only question we got. AI companies. Are we seeing applications for AI companies applying? We have a number of applicants who are doing software and technology. AI, we have seen some. I wouldn't say they're a majority. They are definitely in the mix. But the answer is yes, we are seeing some. Yeah, and that can be a viable company, a business structure for an E2, again, as long as you can clearly show that you've invested the funds, you own 50%, and you're going to employ U.S. workers. So I think that leads us to the end, and we are at time. So thank you all for your time. Yongki, thank you so much for sharing your expertise. Keep an eye out for the email that Yongki mentioned. Do schedule a consultation if we can be helpful at all, and we hope to see you on future webinars as well. Stay well in the meantime. Thank you so much.
Thank you.